Hello, cloud gurus. MiniKube is one of the most popular ways for creating a Kubernetes lab and learning environment on your local desktop or laptop computer. In this lesson, you'll learn how to deploy MiniKube on a Mac OS system. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. At a high level, the steps to deploy MiniKube on a Mac are first, to make sure that virtualization is supported in your CPU, and 99% of the time it is, especially on newer systems. But it's always good to fulfill this prerequisite and make sure that everything's going to work before you get started. I'll walk you through how to use the sysctl command to do that in just a minute. The next step is to install a hypervisor, but this isn't as hard as it sounds. In fact, it can be done with a single command. The default hypervisor is VirtualBox, but VMware Fusion can also be used. In just a moment, I'll walk you through installing VirtualBox using just a single command. From there, you install MiniKube, install kubectl or kubecontrol, and then finally start up MiniKube. To do that, we'll check to see if virtualization is supported with sysctl-a, pipe that to grep, -e -color, and what we're pulling out are the machine dependency CPU features, and specifically looking to make sure that VMX is available. After that, we'll use Brew, which is a package manager for Mac OS, to install VirtualBox. If you don't already have Brew installed, just point your web browser to brew.sh, and from there you can get the single command that you can use to install Brew. It's a really handy tool, and once you have it, there are thousands of packages that you can easily install and uninstall with just a single command. So we'll use brew cask install VirtualBox at the command line to get VirtualBox installed. From there, we'll use brew cask install MiniKube to install MiniKube, and then brew install Kubernetes CLI to install the kubectl or kubecontrol command, and then brew install Docker to install the Docker client. We'll start up MiniKube with MiniKube start, and finally we'll configure our Docker client to talk to the Docker server that's running in MiniKube. And I should point out that installing the Docker client and configuring the Docker client are optional steps, but it's very handy to have both kubectl and the Docker client available to help you to manage your Kubernetes pods and your Docker containers that are running in the MiniKube Kubernetes cluster. We're here in the lab at the command prompt, and I encourage you to follow along. The first thing that we're going to do is to check to see if virtualization is supported. To do that, I'm going to use the sysctl command, -a. We'll pipe that to grep, -E. We're going to use the color option to color code what we're looking for here to make it easier to find. And we're going to look for machine CPU features with a pipe and VMX. And take a look at that. It says that VMX, or the virtualization features or virtualization extensions, are supported by our CPU. So we're good to go on that. That is just a prerequisite that we need to make sure that we check on. The next thing we need to do here to start the installation is actually to run brew cask install VirtualBox. And VirtualBox is going to be our virtualization hypervisor that's going to run the MiniKube virtual machine, which will actually have Kubernetes running inside. Again, if you don't already have Brew installed, I recommend you point your web browser to brew.sh, press enter, and that'll give you the single command line option that you use to install Brew. It's super easy. Once you have Brew installed, it makes package installation very easy. It's going to allow us to install not only VirtualBox, but also MiniKube, kubecontrol, and Docker. And look at that, VirtualBox was successfully installed. I like that. That was easy. We installed VirtualBox with a single command. We didn't have to bring up the GUI and click next, next, next. And that was the first step that we need to perform to get MiniKube installed. So if we clear the screen, the next step is to run brew cask install MiniKube. And that's it. That's how fast and easy it was. Now, I had already downloaded MiniKube in a previous test, so that's why this happened so quickly. When you perform the installation, it might take a couple minutes longer, but make sure you watch for that final line right there that says MiniKube was successfully installed. Now, I should point out that when we installed MiniKube over in Windows, kubectl or kube control, which is our Kubernetes client that we use for administration, was also automatically installed. But that's not the case when you install MiniKube on your Mac OS system. And because of that, before we start up MiniKube, we're going to do brew install Kubernetes CLI, which is kubectl. And we get an error at this point. It tells us that the following directories are not writable, specifically user local include. And you may or may not get this message. In our case, we did. So I'm simply going to mark this, copy it, and then paste this in, which will change the ownership to the user that I'm logged in with. And then we'll make sure that our user has write permissions to that same directory by simply copying and pasting in the change mod command. So now if we clear the screen and we restart the installation with brew install Kubernetes CLI, we don't get the error message this time. We downloaded kubectl and we successfully installed kubectl. Now I know we got a little bit of an error down here at the bottom, but this was actually related to the brew cleanup, which is really unrelated to installing kubectl. Let's clear the screen and let's run kubectl. And indeed, kube control does work for us, so we don't have a problem there. And then the final installation that we need to perform, although it's not completely required just to run MiniKube, is to install the Docker client. And we'll do that with brew install Docker. This is the Docker client that's going to be talking to the Docker server that's running in the MiniKube virtual machine. With that installation complete, let's clear the screen and let's run Docker. And we do get the typical Docker output. However, I'll tell you in advance, once we start up MiniKube, which includes the Docker daemon running inside, our Docker client won't be able to talk to that Docker daemon by default. And because of that, let's type MiniKube here, and you can see all the commands that are possible. We need to run one of these commands, which is right up here, docker env. That will set up our Docker environmental variables so that our Docker client talks to the Docker server or Docker daemon running in the MiniKube virtual machine. So let's clear the screen and let's do MiniKube docker env. And here we go. It tells us we actually have to do this once our MiniKube virtual machine is running. So let's clear the screen and let's do a MiniKube start. And this actually creates the VirtualBox virtual machine. You can see it's going to have 2 vCPUs, 2 gigs of memory, and a 20 gig virtual disk. We're now preparing Kubernetes 1.16 and Docker 18.09. We're pulling images and launching Kubernetes, then starting up the API server, the proxy server, etcd, the Kubernetes scheduler, controller, DNS, and there you go. We successfully started up MiniKube, and it tells us that kubectl is now configured to use MiniKube. If we clear the screen, let's type kubectl space get space nodes. And there you go. You can see the name of our single node that's running is MiniKube. Its status is ready. It's a master node, and it's running Kubernetes version 1.16. Let's try another test here. Let's do a Docker PS. And it looks like our Docker client cannot talk to the Docker server running in the MiniKube VM. To fix that, we're going to run a MiniKube docker-env, and this tells us the command to use, which is this eval MiniKube docker-env right here, to actually configure our Docker client to talk to the Docker server. So we'll paste that in. We immediately get a command prompt again, and now let's try Docker PS again. And there you go. You can see that the Docker server knows that there are multiple containers running, and you can see that all of these relate to Kubernetes. That's because this is the Kubernetes master, and there are many different pods which contain containers running to provide all the Kubernetes master services that are required. To summarize, we first checked to make sure that virtualization was supported by our CPU, and then we installed VirtualBox. We installed MiniKube, we installed the Kubernetes CLI, we installed the Docker client, we started up MiniKube, And then optionally, we configured the Docker client to talk to the Docker server running in VirtualBox. We now have a working Kubernetes master with a working kubectl and working Docker client. In the rest of the course, we'll be spending most of our time in the lab environment. I think you're really going to enjoy it. I'll see you in the next lesson.